Forged in Geekdom.
Hi everyone, my name is Jordan Brandis, the co-editor-in-chief of That's My Entertainment, and I want to welcome you to our very first podcast. With the current news of Marvel Infinity War and the first trailer dropping, it only seems fitting that myself, like many of us, are doing a rewatch of the MCU to build up to the road to Infinity War. And with that, I'd like to take the time to talk a little retrospective about the MCU, what it means, where it's going, and its place in the larger pop culture world. It can't be understated just how important a movie like this is. It's been 10 years in the making, and every single movie that it's done has led up to it. So imagine a full decade of hype, a full decade of built-in marketing, and everybody had their own favorite character already. It's a guaranteed blockbuster, and I mean, from a film standpoint, it's utterly genius. I mean, to make this a little bit easier, I was going to do this film by film, but I've decided to do this phase by phase, just so we can look at the broader picture. So I've taken the last week or so and watched all of phase one. Here are my thoughts. So, I mean, I had noticed that, I've watched the Marvel Cinematic Universe many times. And I know it fairly well, but with Infinity War coming up, I decided to try something new. And I highly recommend it. Instead of watching release order, you should definitely watch it in timeline order. And it really does make a difference. Because while the storytellers may have had a general idea of where it was going when it was released, watching it in continuity fills in a lot of those gaps. I mean, it allows you to know that Cap is on ice while all of Iron Man is going on. It gives you a broader sense of where everybody really is as all the events are happening. And it changes things. It changes the level of storytelling. Now keep in mind, that's only for phase one. The timeline gets a little more skewed as you enter phase two and phase three, especially phase three. Phase three is a complete mess as to where everything goes. Guardians Volume 2 is in the wrong place. Doctor Strange actually goes after Black Panther. It's kind of screwed up right now. As far as I could tell, the furthest possible point in the Marvel Cinematic Universe timeline right now is the end scene from Thor Ragnarok. That is as far as we go. But let's break down phase one. Anybody that was there in 2008 remembers just how amazing watching the first Iron Man was in theaters. And the experience itself was great, not even counting that final tag with Nick Fury at the end. The movie itself somehow brought a B-list character to the forefront and made them extremely cool. And that's a tactic that Marvel would continue to do well into the future. No one really knew who the Guardians were back in like 2012, but now everybody loves Groot and everybody loves Rocket. And these were really obscure characters back in the comic universe. And I mean, Marvel has to be commended for doing that. I mean, for taking risk right from the start to lead with Iron Man, to have your flagship character be this relatively minor character within the comics and then build your whole cinematic universe around that. It takes guts. But I mean, 2008 was a big year for movies. I mean, that was also the exact same year Dark Knight and Hellboy 2 and Hancock and a bunch of others. You saw the superhero genre really expanding its wings, coming into the own of what it is now. I mean, those in the comic book world, though they grew up with it like myself, consider sort of like 1980 to maybe 2005 to really 2008 when Iron Man came out, the Dark Ages. There were so many bad movies made under the title of comic books that it's almost baffling. I mean, granted, there were some exceptions. I mean, Roger Corman's Fantastic Four isn't that bad. It's actually the best of the Fantastic Four movies. Dolph Lundgren's Fantastic Four gets kind of a bad rap, but it's really not that bad. The TV show still remains the best interpretation of it. But then there were just horrible ones, like Spider-Man 1977 or Doctor Strange, the made-for-TV movie. There were so many misfires there. If you want a point of reference, I recommend you look up Captain America, the TV pilots. There were two made-for-TV pilots starring Reb Brown from Space Mutiny. It's like Captain America in name only. He drives around in a van. He's got a motorcycle. It just doesn't work. He doesn't fit. I don't know. It's fascinating to watch, but I'm so glad we evolved way beyond that. I'm glad Marvel had the guts to come forward and do what they did. By far the weakest in the series, though, of Phase 1. And I'll get some argument from this because it's almost a tie between Incredible Hulk and Iron Man 2. But I have to give Iron Man 2 the mantle of weakest. It kind of rehashes the same plot as Iron Man 1. And once again gives Tony that, other billionaires are bad and they fight him with his own tech. Part of the reason it took so long for Superman to really find its place, I mean, say what you will about Man of Steel, but at least it gave Superman someone he could really fight against and fight, actually pull punches on. And the Iron Man stuff just kind of feels like, yes, it got a little bit bigger and there were more explosions and all that, but it's still Iron Man suit versus Iron Man suit. Didn't feel like he really came into his own until Avengers, where it's Iron Man against a problem he can't immediately solve. And that's the genius of the comic books. The genius of comic books in general is letting them play in their much larger sandbox, which has been a limiting factor. And as someone that reads comics, that shared universe is what brings it all together. I mean, I remember it being maddening that watching Batman and Superman and all of these and just never quite figuring out why they could never interact on screen, what was stopping them. And I mean, it wasn't rights. DC has owned the rights to all of their characters since the very beginning. And it took Marvel doing their shared universe for something like that to come together, however badly that may have ended up. But then the Avengers came along. Avengers changed everything, quite literally. I mean, okay, so let's backtrack a little bit and talk more about Phase 1 before we just dive right into the end of Phase 1. Part of the admirable thing about it, and the fact that it even worked in general, is that every single movie in there, except for Iron Man 2, is an origin story. So you're essentially getting a variation on the same theme over and over and over again. But the sheer contrast in genre between each of them makes all of them stand out. So as you rewatch them, it feels fresh. And yeah, it's easy to get burnt out, but not nearly as much as, say, Star Wars. There's something like 9 Star Wars movies now, and if you attempted to rewatch all of them, you get a little tired of them after a while. Like Lord of the Rings. If you were to watch all 6 Lord of the Rings films, you'd never want to watch Lord of the Rings again. It just, it tires you out watching the same thing over and over and over again. But Marvel Studios' ability to blend different genres into it, to fully explore the full nature of the sandbox that they're playing in, whether it's the cosmic side of Thor and Guardians or Captain Marvel, or the more rooted side of Captain America and Iron Man and any of that. They speak very different languages, and they shouldn't mesh, but they do. Avengers finds a way, and that leads us back to Avengers. Rewatching it, you find that because each character is so distinctly different, I mean, Thor is a demigod, space alien from Asgard that speaks in near Shakespearean, while Iron Man, Tony Stark, speaks in mostly technobabble, and the Hulk just smashes things a lot. They shouldn't work together, but each one seems to make up a different note, and combined under the guise, the tight ship of Joss Whedon, at least in the first one, it feels like a symphony. You suddenly have all these different instruments coming together and just playing beautifully. I've seen Avengers maybe 12 times now, and truthfully, I may know what's coming next, but I'm never not entertained by it. The contrast would be Batman vs. Superman. And it's almost fascinating to consider, especially since Joss Whedon had a hand in kind of sort of directed both of them. I mean, you've got two of the major teams in comic book history done by essentially the same director with two very, very different outcomes. If the Avengers is pitch perfect, then Justice League is just, it's damage control. It's him making up for Zack Snyder. It's him apologizing for Zack Snyder. It's almost tonal whiplash. Now, if Whedon had been there from the beginning, we may have had a much more fluid thing, but even then it would have copied the Marvel template a little bit too much. And I'm glad DC took the route that they did, but they may have jumped the gun. They shouldn't have been afraid to keep doing origin stories, at least for a little while, and pull the B-listers in there. That's fine. Give a little bit of context around Cyborg and maybe not quite Green Lantern, because the taste of Green Lantern is still pretty bad in everybody's mouth. I mean, Deadpool's still making fun of it, and that was only a couple of years ago. But the contrast is baffling. I mean, Justice League came out on DVD last week, and not one person noticed. But all it took with the trailer for Marvel's Infinity War to drop, or Jessica Jones Season 2, and suddenly that's just vanished from everybody's mind. And that says something to the power of those movies. I know many of you are going to call me a fanboy, but I mean, I really have. I've seen the gamut of what's out there, both good and bad. I read the comics as well. I mean, I know the source material, and that really does help. And I mean, I didn't start out as a Marvel fan. I started out as a DC fan. Growing up, I loved Superman. And I mean, he was my go-to hero. I like what he stood for. But honestly, I remember being in the movie theater watching Captain America, the First Avenger, and by the time that movie ended, I knew someone new to look up to, and that focus shifted. Suddenly I got where Captain America was coming from, almost more so than Superman. And those flaws really make it come together. I mean, that being said, it makes Infinity War that much more special. And if you look at the trailer for it, the Avengers were just 8, 9 or so characters. I mean, Infinity War has 45 characters that they're playing with. It's just bumped up and bumped up and bumped up. And their ability to increase the size of the sandbox without worrying about the risk so much. I mean, they've got enough built-in audience that they can take the risk and know that it's going to be a success. Just look at Black Panther. They dove right into Black Panther, and that became a cultural phenomenon. I mean, Wonder Woman had an impact. It did. But nothing like Black Panther. And I think Captain Marvel may have the same impact as well if it's pitched the same way. But to have just that level of success and that level of cultural impact needs to be admired. I will admit, it's been a while since I've seen Phase 2, so I'm looking forward to dive in. We won't just be talking about comics in this webcast. We'll be talking about a little bit of everything. I'm going to bring in some guests to talk. If there's anything you would like me to talk about, please feel free to reach out and let me know. Thanks for spending time with me.